Hey folks, welcome to Snowpal's Polyglot Software Development Podcast. Our guest today is Dan Lopez. Dan is an innovation executive with 2 decades of experience building and leading teams to develop and deploy novel technologies with lasting impact. Dan is now using his expertise and vision to build the future of AI as the Chief Technology Officer at Neural. Dan, thanks for taking the time to chat with me today.
My pleasure, Krish.
Before we get started with the topic, Dan, you've done a number of wonderful things that I actually have very little experience about. So I'm super excited to sort of discover and learn in the next 35 to 40 minutes. But before we do any of that, if you could just introduce yourself to our audience, that would be great.
Yeah, awesome. I'm Dan. I'm the resident nerd at a company called Neural Labs Inc. We are based out of Florida, but we have a growing team around the country here in the United States, and soon to be around the world. And we're really focused on bringing machine intelligence to every walk of life. And My background, when I was young and brash and had hair, was really around computational biology and algorithms to understand uh, electron microscopy, to understand things like small things like protein folding or cells talking to each other, and what can go inside a cell and what comes out of a cell, and the cell membrane um, tells us quite a bit about how we can uh, stave off infectious disease or cancer or other things that help us live longer, things like that. But I really got really fascinated in software and software development early in my life and career, and I got an opportunity to get into defense and intelligence and telecommunications very early on in my career. And off for a wild ride we went. I've helped erect very large distributed systems for computer and imagery delivery, and content delivery, for other things like looking at how people interact with the natural and built environments throughout the years. And when we start thinking about those things, how do we see those things in aggregate? How do we see the planet um, in a way that's more like a microscope, but planted back to the Earth? So it's like a macroscope, and using remote sensing, giant telescopes looking back at the Earth, to help us think about how we can become better stewards of the planet by understanding the patterns that happen. Um, and as compute has matured and the science of artificial intelligence has matured, we're able to now start cracking open that nut and seeing what we can do and peeling back the onion, if you will, to see what else we can do when we start connecting the dots. And that's what my tradecraft really is taking technology and building something meaningful by connecting the dots. And I've helped organizations think through how to use big data in all kinds of shapes and sizes, and really thinking about it from an applied sciences mechanism, though. How do we use this in real life? And it's not a science fair project, but that we are applying this in everyday solutions. And that's really what the magic of Neural is that we're really trying to take machine intelligence and put that in the hands of just everyone, and put it in the daily life of someone who runs a business, someone who runs a government agency, someone who runs a healthcare practice. Uh, Machine intelligence can open up that. And so um, building teams and expertise around machine intelligence has always been a difficult challenge, but that's the other thing that drives me to wake up every day, is to build technologies with people who are way smarter than I am, and help solve some of the beginning precursors of the challenges that face all of us. And that's really
Dan.
what led me to now. That's why I have a gray beard, and that's why I'm bald. But
Thanks for that wonderful introduction. I think it's a great segue because you said working with people much smarter than you, right? I'm here. I'm 100% sure that's literally the case with me right now in this conversation. I have no doubts. So, given that I feel like I'm talking to somebody who's going to be way smarter than me, I have my work cut out for the next 30 minutes. So, let me try to discover you, what you do, and in the context of what we do, both as a company at Snowpal or me as an individual and our audience. I think it's going to be an exciting 30 minutes. And I feel like I have my work cut out for me here. No kidding there. Let me start with some very basic questions in terms of understanding. So I'm going to do a screen share here. So we go to your company. And is it all right if I interrupted you as you're talking, Dan? Tell me
absolutely.
if you, yeah, just so I learn as we go. So this is the website. I pulled up your product, your company website, right? So the first, like at the highest level, the first set of questions I have are, so these are different products, right? In other words, are you a product company that's building these products? If so, I have a set of questions, but if it's services, then I have a different set of questions.
Chris, I love that question. And the reason why I love that question is because throughout the last series of years, I've heard this very question. What's the use case? And when you say what's the use case for, say, I always smile, even chuckle, because AI is not really the black box that has use cases. It is just augmenting human capacity for understanding patterns and then applying those patterns for making decisions for whatever at a massive scale. Um, when we reflected about what we are going to build at Neural with this type of technology, we first started with the premise of a foundational layer. The foundational layer is really the fabric of all of our machine intelligence that we're building for our customer base. And so when you're going through our website and you see different sub brands, those are actually companies that have a solution suite, not a product in them by themselves and not a widget, but their solution suites much broader in both current applications, but also aspirational to help communities of interest use that to help innovate very rapidly on top of what we're building. Um, think of it as recombinant DNA, where each one of these organizations starts to uh, push and pull their solution suites for broadening a larger context of what we do to solve different problems. So when you're going through Neural Earth right now, what Neural Earth really started with was when we look back at the Earth, whether we're flying over the Earth like Superman in a plane, looking straight down with drone data or aerial data, or we're looking down from much farther away, 400 kilometers up, 500 kilometers up, we're looking at the Earth for objects and the context of where those objects are happening, but we also have to merge that with the idea of time series data, or how is the planet changing over time. One of the first customers that came to us was like, we would like to look at properties and the proximity to risk. So one of the best use cases is natural phenomenon that happens on Earth is fairly vast. Like you wake up and I'm sure you think about, what is it going to rain on me today? Is it going to be hot? Is it going to be cold? Is it going to be lightning? And that's hyper local awareness and situational awareness. But what we're trying to do is have a macroscopic scale, something that is akin to understanding even things like GDP. Signals in the data tell us a little bit about patterns of trade and commerce and supply chain, logistics. And what we're trying to do here with our tooling is allow people who are not geospatial practitioners, and I'll get into that in a second, but they're not practitioners of remote sensing or geospatial or even GIS. They're just like you and I trying to use one of these to navigate in the world. right? And there's a map on this thing. We don't know how the map really is created. You don't care about GCP or what we call ground control points to really understand how we piece these things together with imagery and topographic or elevation models or those types of things. All you do is trying to go to Starbucks. That's all that matters. And I'm not plugging Starbucks, but I'm just saying you're just trying to go get groceries or pick your kids up from school, and we rely on it every day. And so the idea is that you peel that back in a layer and zoom out. Many people are doing that. Many people are interacting with the environments, whether it's built or natural. And there's a proximity to risk that we all share. Um, and we thought about this. And so we said, how do we take what we see and mathematics around the social dynamics and mathematics around risk and the physics there, shove them into a primordial soup and spark it with some other additional innovations. And that's what we've built at Neural Earth is the ability to go much further beyond just tracking your assets and the proximity of those assets to risk. But then how do you go beyond and understand your supply chain, your logistics, your field operations, and other type of geospatial queries to make those decisions very rapidly and at an unprecedented scale. That's what Neural Earth is by itself.
Okay, so let's dig a little bit deeper as I understand more about it, right? So with that, in other words, in this example here, we are talking about risk to proximity, and let's just stick to that single example, just to
Sure.
dig deeper and for me to understand better. Uh, who would be like a typical customer? And then we'll go to the problem in a second, but let's start with for this problem, the use case that you just described here, Dan. Who would be? It doesn't have to be a real customer that you have, but who would be sort of a typical customer?
Yeah, I think, and again, these are from our first product market fit, first cohort of using our tooling. So again, when you build a product, you have to, if you're smart about it, you build it side by side with the people who are going to be using it. Otherwise, you're building and then you're guessing and then you light it on
In a
fire.
vacuum, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and you do that again, hopefully not too many times. But um, really, we started sitting down with a bunch of leading experts in what they would like to see. And what our thesis was open up dialogue with people who are not necessarily doing something that I make fun of all the time over analysis of the obvious, which is a practitioner building tools for another practitioner. And they start speaking a language that amplifies a even an industry that no one else can participate in because it's all gone way too far into specs and standards or whatever. What we're trying to do is say, okay, what are you trying to understand? And we went and said to an insurance brokerage, well, if you're trying to understand risk to get an edge or an arbitrage opportunity on your insights from what we can provide you, going to the carriers, going to shop deals for your customers, they became some of our first customers, are the insurance brokers. They can take a property on our platform, plug it into a existing or a model portfolio, and they can see what kind of risk is associated, whether it's going to burn down to the ground with wildfires or whatever, to uh, you got to get a life jacket on because you're going to be floating down the river kind of stuff. And we can actually predict some of these things. And what's fascinating about what we see is that we can apply these things. And when you hear about flooding in, say, North Carolina or something like that, or in other parts of the world, the you heard about Spain, I'm sure, on the news, and you hear
Right.
about these things, and they used to be rare, but now they're happening all the time. And why is that? And I can get into some of that science, but the proximity to these risk items are now trying to be ascertained by not just the brokers, but the reinsurance carriers of monetary funding of insurance carriers. So if you think about how we approached it, and this should be for anyone building any product, you find the organic upward pressure on the marketplace, and you find the downward pressure, the top tier enterprise customers pushing down on the middle part is the people who are the transactions, which are the insurance carriers, right? And you triangulate, or you're now flanking the market, and the people who are the most, especially in people who sell products to avoid risk, they're the ones who avoid risk the most for change, right? They don't want to adopt new tools or whatever. They have their spreadsheets, and literally, I'm not
Hey
joking,
Dan.
spreadsheets.
Okay. I'm going to interrupt you here. Sorry, I'm going to share my screen. So as you explain
Sure.
this, sometimes I think a bit visually, and I think it might help put this into I don't draw very well, but to the extent that I'd still like to see them visually illustrated. So let me share this so I can capture some of what you're saying for me to digest it, and I'm pretty sure the audience might digest that better as well. So
Sure.
let me share this. Tell me if you see my screen here.
Yep.
Uh, hey Dan, yep, okay, you do, right? Because I'm sharing it, and when I do that, I don't see you. I see one or the other, actually. Okay, cool, perfect. So I'm going to just write this up. I just said neural, and let's take the use case here. The use case was proximity to risk is what we're talking about here, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
proximity to risk is the use case. Okay, and then the next thing you mentioned, I asked for a typical customer. In this case, would be sort of an insurance provider, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this is what we are particularly focusing on, right? This would this be like one, I know when we went to neural, we saw a number of different, under solutions. Would this be under neural earth property insurance? Would that sort of what this come under?
Property and casualty is what we're talking about for a use case, a customer story here, a customer journey for an insurance provider or a broker or a reinsurance uh, company is going to be wanting to understand risk to assets that are property, real estate,
Okay.
commercial or residential, right? Um, that's literally a snowflake on the tip of the iceberg. Even in understanding risk, um, we created mathematics around ranking risk that can be applied to autonomous vehicles or your insurance premium. Um, and that's a little bit different than just kind of looking at when does a hurricane fly over a specific property.
Okay, so that gives me an idea, right? So we're taking this particular use case, proximity to risk to property assets, and then we've said a typical consumer or customer in this case would be sort of an insurance provider. And to understand, in the next 25 minutes, also want to get into your technology and your approach to solving those problems from that perspective. But for me to get there, I need to know a little bit more, which is why I'm going to ask you, uh, how do you engage with this? So in other words, if I were an insurance provider and you're, Dan, representing Neural, how in other words, let me sort of trivialize this for a second so we can sort of work uh, from bottom up as I understand this. What are your, in other words, do you take a predefined solution or a product that you have and then you customize it to the needs of the insurance provider, or I'm taking two extremes but it could be somewhere in the middle, or do you go with certain design patterns or ways in which you've solved problems such as these in the past, and you actually sit down with the provider and ask for their actual custom requirements to building a solution around it, or is it somewhere in between?
Yeah, it's a good question because it's multifaceted to build products and build products rapidly. You have to sit next to people who are the experts who would be utilizing your tooling, but they're not going to be experts on how to convert what they do now to where you could take them. And so, yes, we take how they would want to build that or build their requirements. They give us all their requirements. Could you do something for me? Could you imagine a world that I could do these things on your platform? Some of them are awesome. They go right into the product, and some of them are super crazy and you know not even worth our time or going to jail for because they violate either the rules of physics or the rule of law. It's things that are delightful to the customer, things that will make their life better, is and more efficient and more enjoyable to work with these types of tools. That's what we do to then say, what is the feedback loop that goes from product ideation into to product market fit, and deploy that out to the market, rinse and repeat.
Okay. So in this case, does it mean in our example, would there have been a predefined solution that works to an extent, or would it be, hey, you know what, tell me what you exactly, we could take one or the other and then we can dig deeper into it, which would be a more appropriate example to sort of delve deeper into?
Yeah. So um, our goal here is for Krish to go onto our platform and utilize the power of what we can do just like anyone else can. And I think the biggest challenge here is for us to not get lost in each tree that we see in a forest, that is, especially if it's a diverse forest, and allow that. Also, the artistry here is for how we adapt our understanding of things that are universal in our technology. That when someone says, "What is the use case for satellite imagery?" I ask you. Let me ask you that. What is the use case for
Right.
satellite imagery?
Um, I guess one of the things I'm guessing could be weather related, right? If you want to know the dynamics of climate change and probably weather conditions, maybe it helps that. Maybe directions, just navigation in general, possibly, or maybe even geopolitical activity that's happening in different parts of the world that different countries want to spy on. I'm just randomly throwing a bunch of things that come immediately in mind. Hopefully, one of them makes sense.
Um, they're all the same. They're not different use cases. So if I think about how specific instrumentation has been built, those things can see the rainbow of color, right? We have different wavelengths of light, and they reflect. When we see white color, it's all the colors of the rainbow, right? If we see black, it's absorbing all the colors of the rainbow and reflecting either nothing or reflecting specifically something close to a black, but it's really kind of like a purple or something dark hue. But there's phenomenon on Earth that have those properties that reflect back to us. And when we look at ourselves in the mirror from space, we 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 use that principle of what's reflecting back to that sensor with different wavelengths to actually understand what's happening. So a plant that blooms, why is a plant green? Let me ask you that. Why is a plant green?
Oh my
Chlorophyll.
God, is it chlorophyll? I don't
Chlorophyll,
know. Yeah,
right?
okay.
Photosynthesis. That's one of my favorite boring topics. But photosynthesis will metabolize chlorophyll a certain way, and it releases a certain color, which is going to reflect. It's absorbing everything, but reflecting green. And so when we see healthy plants, we see green, right? And when we see that from space, we see lots of green. And then sometimes it's not so green in different areas of the earth. When we grow things, sometimes we harvest. Sometimes there's a science called phrenology, when we're thinking about the blooming of plants and different types of other phenomena, that we can say, oh, there's healthy plants. They're going to give us a lot of soy. They're going to give us a lot of apples or whatever it might be. And we can then start to count and measure by using mathematics on not pretty pictures. The data that comes down from space in these images are very rich. A pixel will have a voltage, almost like a number between infinite -1 to 1, but infinite amount of values to tell us how green it is, how red it is, or whatever it is. And we do math. When we do the math on those pixels, we can see wild things like healthy plants or non-healthy plants. We can see deserts forming. We can see drought happening. We can see turbidity in water, water security issues. Water security is, how long can you go without drinking water, Krish? One
Probably,
day,
I don't know, for survival,
24
maybe a few
hours.
days, but I wouldn't go for more than a few hours. Yeah, okay.
24 hours. If you do go longer than that, which your body can, we've evolved to do that, but your organs start to not like that. And there's nothing you can do as a human that after a certain amount of days, your organs start to stop working very well. And they can actually have catastrophic consequences for not drinking water. Same thing with food. We can go for a while without drinking or without eating food, but you think about what we can see from space and we look at bushel output, we can see and even predict how much we're going to be growing. Can't that also be an indicator of GDP output, water security, and conflict? Drought is not necessarily just isolated, it has direct implications of choke points on highways. That's how we connect the dots with what we see, and our proximity to risk is not isolated to our property. It's not isolated to our car. It's a pushing and pulling of things that are evolving around us, just like living things. Risk is almost like a
Yeah,
living
but then hang
organism
on.
that,
Sorry,
yes,
let me interrupt you there, right? No, in the context of the earlier part of what we were talking about there. So you are, you go to this insurance provider, you're like, hey, here's the value we're going to bring to the table, right? So the just so I can ask the next part of my question, the first, we can make an assumption here. So do you come to me as a provider with sort of making a few assumptions about potential problems that I might have as a company, just given the fact that I work in this industry? Or do you come saying, hey, you know what, we've worked with companies, and companies in the industry, what kind of problems you potentially might have, but we're not bringing a predefined solution to the table necessarily. We're going to start pretty much from scratch and build whatever it is that you do want ground up. Like, where, like, if we can pick one and go with it, but where would the ideal fit be here?
commanding this type of technology is just like any other thing. If you convert from a spreadsheet to a relational database, why are you doing that? Because you need some repeatability, you need scale, and then you're talking to a customer who wants to put all their data on different tables or whatever and relate data that way. Um, this type of technology allows us to answer profound questions, and we, in the back of our minds, we know what else we're going to be building. We know where other opportunities are. When we went to risk is because we sat side by side. Our customer was also one of our investors. So if you were to go build a product intentionally just to go customize something for someone else to help maybe build a product, that also can be fraught with risk when it comes to intellectual property. There's other types of things where you want to build with some tooling that you already have. That's why we started with the fabric layer prior to getting to our customer base and say, how can we answer these questions faster, better, cheaper, and at scale than anything behind us? And that's where we have some predefined stack, and we use that as kind of um, our tricks of the trade, our van that with all of the. I think I'm freezing a little bit, Krish. I'm
Oh
not
no,
sure what's
I can
happening.
hear you fine. I think, yeah, I think it probably does during the upload, but please going, Dan. I think it.
Um, but I think the misnomer here is to go build in a black box and then try to go sell that. What you need to do typically when you accelerate these processes is that a customer already has a need, but they don't know how to articulate, and they go to subject matter experts. And what we had was a series of subject matter experts in remote sensing and insurance on our team. So off we went to the races to build that. But why insurance? Here's the other thing: you have to make some sort of guess on market sizing always when you're building these products, right? Like, is there enough people to buy this? And neural, our thesis is $500 billion. That's $500 billion is typically our litmus test. Is there a $500 billion market that is underserved with AI, that operationalizing AI in these things, not as widgets, but as full blown infrastructure to all the businesses that serve that vertical, um, is how we go and build our products. That's our kind of our true north. Is there $1 trillion market or $500 billion market? And what are those things that we know how to do very rapidly to go into those markets and capture that market and start to turn the tides over to modern technology outside of what we know and love today. And we also have to communicate to our customers that what you know of AI and what's in the hype cycle right now is not AI. It's a large language model is a way for us as humans to interact with machine intelligence a certain way that's from our natural language, but it doesn't actually effect change on how to perform your task. You have to go that next level, and that is on every sense: touch, your eyesight, your hearing, uh, all of the different senses that you think you have as a human. Tell a robot or a humanoid or some sort of LLM to go replicate those things. It's impossible. But what you have to do is build tooling that approximates augmentation of the human intuition. Because why would we try to replace our intuition? And that's the most beautiful gift nature has given us.
Absolutely.
It is truly how we survive in the most, sometimes most austere and freaky environments that you could ever think of. And we're still here. Why would we give that away? We want to augment that.
So then, essentially, so when let's say you mentioned that, right? To take it a little bit further, how
Mhm.
does your system does it sit standalone when you actually go build it for the insurance provider? In other words, they have their existing systems. Do you do they integrate your solution with their existing solutions, whatever it is that they've been using all along? Or do your solutions or your components become an integral part that become embedded in their existing offerings?
Another awesome question. So, when you build a technology like PageRank, right? PageRank helps us create some sort of ranking mechanism for authoritative linkbacks documents on the World Wide Web. Awesome. What are you going to do with that? Well, we have to store all of those rankings and its relationship to summarization of all that metadata on billions of documents, and it's ever growing and ever changing. So how do you index all that data and be efficient about that? Well, we have to create big table. Well, oh, that's awesome. We can now store all that information. But how do we query it? Oh, well, let's go create BigQuery. Do you, Chris, download and install Bigtable and BigQuery to go about your day? No, absolutely not. But Google provides you a service on top of those things called Gmail, Drive, Google Sheets, right? That is riding on top of an infrastructure layer. And that's how we think about neural recombinant DNA of technology. Is under the hood, we have some stuff which we're not very public about, but we have some stuff that allows us to go very quickly and scaffold up full-blown industry solution suites. And so when we address healthcare, we're addressing healthcare not necessarily specifically with satellite imagery, but satellite imagery also tells us a little bit about the phenomenon of supply chain and logistics for inoculation logistics going into the field, or expression of disease at certain times of the season, where we have to put other things in the marketplace. So insurance carriers that are not for property insurance, but would be for healthcare insurance, may want to have some arbitrage opportunities, right? For antihistamines. We might want to think about the parts per million particulate in the air, 2.5 size or greater in the air, that's going to be in your lungs for a long time. Not just when you feel better with the wildfires gone, but it's going to be in your lungs for, unfortunately, a very long time. And with that, are there other companies that may want to understand where they put products in the marketplace or services in the marketplace? And that's where it starts to become part of the universal language that we're talking about, is full-blown markets, right? And when you command technology around that type of thing, and some of the incumbents are full aware of this, but when you command some of that, it's where we start to then create opportunities for new markets to exist altogether, and that's
Okay.
neural.
Makes sense. Makes sense, right? So as we get to the come to the top of the hour, right? We have another 5 minutes to go. I want to ask a couple of things related to our conversation, and then some standard question that I ask my guests, which have nothing to do with software or technology. But before we go there, given that our audience is predominantly engineers, developers, architects, and folks in that space, Dan,
Mhm.
what are some of the technologies that you currently use? If you could speak to it from how it was like a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, maybe 6 months ago, before the advent, if I should say, of generative AI, that's fine as a comparison. But regardless, what are some of the technologies that you use today that keep you up, or that you're pretty excited to work on?
Oh, wow. Um, uh, First, generative AI has been around for a very long time. So it's just being able to compute outside of the theoretical norm is now being able to use GPUs and stuff like that. I think that the thing that keeps me up at night is, I think, AI and machine learning and uh, providing efficiencies that are non-human interpreted, are languages that are built by the confines of AI to become more efficient on building languages that it in itself would require to become uh, more efficient at what it does. So think of it like a computer language that builds a computer language. And that will then put some of these things outside of our control. And because we don't understand that, we have to speak a language that we don't understand. And there might be intent to remove human interpretation from computer code, right? That is profound. I think one of the things that keeps me up is not the software or technology stack itself. That's fine, and I love the shiny whistles and bells and all the different things that go whiz. But I think every engineer who's listening, if they haven't already, and we will be releasing our um, our ethical code of conduct, but within that confines is a Hippocratic oath. If you are not an engineer who has any um, other interests but coding, it's important to understand and have a true north of where your life and do no harm is directly to you. It's not theoretical. It's not a nice wishful thinking. you must apply, just like when you go to the doctor and you expect them not to experiment on you, nor should you have an engineer building something that is experimenting with the human element, or introducing things into the kill chain, unless you have expressly said, I am violating this on my own intent. And that is what keeps me up at night. That is something that is profound and is happening, and we have to rapidly get up to speed as a society what it truly means. And people who are legislators are not necessarily technologists and have no idea how to convert talking points to this. And that's what keeps me up at night.
Great answer. A lot of what you said, I have to go back and re-listen more than once, to be honest with you, to get the complete essence of it, which is awesome because that's why we publish this as a video, as a podcast, so people can pause, digest it, do some research, and come back and listen to it or watch it, right? Depending on how they're consuming this content. I know we have just a couple of more minutes to go. I'm going to ask you a non-technical question.
Sure.
But before I did that, Dan, do you have any questions for me? I know uh, we're trying to learn about each other as part of the during this conversation, but even generically speaking, doesn't have to something anything to do with Snowpal or me as a person. Any questions that you would want to ask me at this point?
Chris, what keeps you up at night with technology?
What keeps me at it? I'll tell you a very simple, direct answer because I've been building software for a long time, right? And our company, we launched a product, the first one, like I mentioned before, we got on the podcast 5 years ago, and we keep adding to our list. And we are a very polyglot shop. Then we use a number of different technologies and languages on a daily basis. The thing that keeps me up at night, I should say, is as a developer, you're very excited at doing things that you've not done before, right? I mean, if you've done that many times and it's not super exciting, you still do it as just a way of life, but you want to do something different. And that eagerness, right, to learn, to get out of the comfort zones because it makes you uncomfortable being in a comfort zone. In that context, when we write code, just when you sit down to write an new API or an endpoint today, the muscle memory says that we're trying going to solve that problem. Even though it's a different problem, we're going to solve it in similar ways to how we've done it in the past, which I know even before the advent and the popularity of generative AI and everything we're talking about today. I think every time I solve a problem, a different problem, but in a similar manner, it makes me uncomfortable because I'm like, you know what? The last time I did something like this was, say, 3 months ago, right? Hypothetically. Should I be taking the exact same approach to solving the problem 3 months now down the road? I mean, I'm not talking JavaScript that changes every week. I'm even talking backend technologies that don't necessarily change all that often, but still, you either the version changes or the language changes or the framework changes or the library changes or the fundamental approach to solving problems changes. And what keeps me up at night today is I'm not convinced that, when I'm starting doing something, am I doing it the way it should be done with CUDA, for instance, right? With what NVIDIA is making available for us, or the current way of doing things, because we are naturally going to be, oops, I'm going to stop my timer. It's freaking out on me. So, okay,
No
sorry.
worries.
Um, uh, it's basically trying to say that, hey, Krish, are you solving this problem the way you should be solving the problem today? Or are you kind of relying on muscle memory just because it worked in the past, just because we did it a certain way and it worked fine, does not mean we should be doing it the same way, because we could still do it and it could still work fine. But that means we are doing it outside of the realm of the current times, which makes us extremely uncomfortable as a company and as people who work in the company at Snowpal. So that's singularly the problem every day, which is, are we solving this problem as well as we potentially could without over engineering the problem, right? Because sometimes you could try to solve it very differently, intentionally so, and you're sort of you're missing, losing the, not seeing the forest for the tree, as you will, right? You're over engineering it. So the fine line between how can I solve this problem the best way possible, given the time, money, and resource and the deadlines you have available, that you have in front of you, yet not do it in a fashion that's very dated, right? That to me is typically the question that pops up. It has always been the case, but in the last 6 months to a year, it's just become more of that question.
Krish, are you on the East Coast? You said you were on the East Coast?
Yeah, I live like a few miles west of Washington, D.C.
Okay, so I grew up in Washington, D.C., so I know it well. So if you were
Wow.
to go, I think, say, a 3-hour drive better don't go to Delmarva. It's not worth it. But go down to Virginia Beach and go grab a surfboard. Um, the waves are small enough that you're not going to have such bodily harm when you crash. There's still that risk. But the idea of surfing or learning and playing guitar or something like that, piano, you can play the same instrument, the same song, but differently every single time. And you're learning you have muscle memory, but you have a different way to approach it with artistry. And I think that's what we lose if we're repeating too much of the muscle memory or just throwing a baseball to throw the baseball, and we're not understanding the context. The beauty of any game or sport or musical instrument will, when you master that craft, then every single time you approach it is going to be different. But it seems like it's so easy. Imagine you going to go surf down in Virginia Beach, but Kelly Slater is right next to you. There's a big disconnect of skill sets, and he makes it look easy. But imagine when you stand up for the very first time, the next time you stand up is not going to be the same, but the joy is there. That's really
Right.
what I feel like. Also, not only a Hippocratic oath is required, but technologists need to understand that this is one of the trade crafts that have propelled human endeavors so quickly and rapidly that we have to become stewards of not only the tech, but the art of that tech. That's really important, that all engineers who are listening right now, they are artists. Even though they say that they are nerds or geeks, whatever, they like gaming, I don't care. They are artists because it's taking nothing and creating something. And that can change every single time, just a small amount. And if we're all collaborating in a manner of kind of gauging each other's art, that's a different thing that should get you up in the morning, get you riled to go to work. Uh, every single time is new art that you can do.
You know what, Dan? Wonderfully said. And you may not believe me, but I actually wrote a blog on why coding is an art, more an art than science. And I've done a podcast from a long time ago, a solo podcast, where I actually share that because as somebody who loves creativity and who has a lot of respect for folks who can play an instrument or draw, especially as somebody who has no such skills, like to flaunt absolutely none. I've always sort of, been jealous of people who had those skills. I have immense respect for creators, and for somebody who's not that, the closest I could come was, treat the code I write or the design I create or the architecture I come up with as art. Because if you're not an artist in the true sense of that term, this becomes your art because your code sort of speaks to you, right? Whether it's good, bad, or ugly. You're like, you know what, I wrote this a month ago, I'm not happy about it, that's all right, I'm willing to accept it and improve it. Is, that element of passion, I think, is extremely important. And I think you literally said what I could not have said better. And I try to blog about this, saying coding is most definitely an art, and if you don't want to accept it, that means you probably are thinking it differently than I'm thinking it, right? So that lovely. I have a non-technical question for you, but I know we are at that point. If you don't have a minute, that's totally fine. But if you have a couple of minutes, I can ask you that.
I've got a hard stop in about 2 minutes because I have to get
Oh,
to
no
this other
worries. And
thing.
you know what? It's not even an important question. I was just going to ask you what your favorite food was, but that's
Oh
completely
man, I
fine.
can
But
tell
Dan,
you
just to
right
close
now,
this,
100%
sure,
my
go for it.
favorite food is Indian food.
Name one. Just name a dish.
Oh man, typically something like a combination of dal makhani with any type of butter chicken or something that's sultry and spicy, but it's smooth. Um, that's my go-to. Is that I
I'm not
always feel
surprised
like
about
I
the
have a
butter
mini
chicken because
Thanksgiving.
then the number of restaurants I can think of, even in the DC metro, that actually call
The
themselves
best.
butter chicken. I think there's a fair number of them, so I'm not surprised. I come from the southern part of India, so the food I eat is different, but I certainly do know the food that you're talking about here. This is
Yeah.
awesome, and I want to respect your time that you have to hop off. Then, any closing comments before we close? Before we call it
Uh,
wraps?
Thanks for having me. And anytime you want to nerd out about both the philosophy of building products and the artistry of building products that meet customer needs rapidly, I'm always game to help audiences understand the importance of what we do, especially with the age of AI.
Absolutely, I'm going to take you up on that offer. So again, folks, our guest today was Dan Lopez. Dan is an innovation executive with 2 decades of experience building teams. He's a CTO at Neural. I'm going to include Neural's website, and then Dan's your link to LinkedIn profile. If there's other things you want for us to include, Dan, just let us know, and we'll be happy to do it. Thank you so much for taking the time. This is awesome. I'm going to take a much deeper look at your company as well after we call this
Thanks,
wraps. Cool.
Krish.
Thank you so much, Dan.
All right, cheers.
Yep.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.